Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. James Kerr, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hello, I'm James Kerr. I'm the publisher for Radio James Games, a tabletop role-playing game publishing house. Last year, we published Fight to Survive, role-playing martial arts meets heart. And this year, I'm on to really try and push my new crowdfunding campaign for Solo Martial Blues, which is a solo role-playing game based on the same system. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. But when you said house, you almost sounded Canadian. Did you cross the border? Or do we need to talk to somebody about that accent?
JR, I am Canadian.
What?
Yeah, what are you talking about?
House. What's wrong with house? What was? Is that how you guys say house?
Pre-show and
it's exactly how we say it. House.
No. Yeah, you were talking in the pre-show and you didn't even once mention Timmy Hortons. I think that's required nationally. That's why
I was. You guys were talking about beer. I was going to say, that I don't understand a beer market that isn't filled with small, tiny breweries, which is all I know.
It is here now. The microbreweries
here too. I unfortunately we're not where California is. So what is your stance, since we're talking beers? What's your stance on IPAs? I'm convinced that nobody really likes them. Just hipsters say they do so they can sound cool.
I will punch you. I will punch you right in the face.
Well, I hate to start off the interview being really disappointing, but guys, I'm celiac, so I don't drink beer. It's deadly to me, and I hate. Yeah, I'm the uncoolest person in the room now.
Name your poison. It's beer or any of that shit. For change.
Wait. So you can't have most liquors either, can you?
Not most of them. I can have some things like rum and vodka, and but most of them are off the wine, right? I guess. But anything with wheat or barley is off the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Grain-based.
Yeah. Alcohol. There we go. I started the whole thing talking about my asthma.
That's really interesting because celiacs, and we don't. It's not really a topic we've toppled on this show.
Wait, so can you have honey-based? So you could have mead, because we were talking about that in the pre-show too.
Yeah, depending on what they put in the mead, because there's lots of different mead recipes. I have different friends who make mead, and some of them are gluten-free, and some of them are not.
Okay.
Because that's a big thing, right? That it's gluten free. Right?
It can be. It's honey based, right? So you might end up pulling out a battle axe and trying to raid the Saxons or something. But otherwise, it's
they had it coming. If we're being entirely honest,
I like raiding Saxons.
The only thing that makes me sad about all that is he lives in Canada, or he's from Canada, and he can't even drink a puppers.
I don't think that's a real beer brand up there.
It is now.
We're big fans of the show Letterkenny.
Oh, okay. Letterkenny. You don't even understand, Nick, how much Letterkenny is how I grew up. Every word in that show is without exaggeration. And people who watch it think, oh, it must be bloated, it must be blown up, it must no. This is, I grew up in a small town in Ontario that's about 20 miles away from where he's talking about, where Jared Kelso grew up, right? So Jared Kelso is the kind of guy that I would be spending weekends with growing up.
Jared Kelso is my spirit animal. I was born and raised American, but watching that show, I grew up on a farm, or ranch, technically. I play hockey. I used to like to fish. I had the unpleasure of ice fishing. I didn't enjoy it because I was cold. But I like riding snowmobiles. I like everything about that show, because it connected with me, which is weird because I don't live on that side of the border. But all those things that he enjoys, or his mentality, is very akin to how I grew up.
I also grew up on a farm, on a small Ontario dairy farm. And in my teenage years in a small town. I don't know what you guys consider a small town, but for us, it was like under 1,000 people usually.
Yeah,
Maybe,
that's pretty close.
maybe at the height of tourist season, it might balloon up to 3,000 or something if you count all the surrounding areas or whatever. But there wasn't too much to do in your teenage years other than to get drunk and get into fights.
And tip cows. I don't know if that's a thing in Canada, but we like to go and tip cows.
Anybody tries to tip my cows, I'm going to fight him. That's what it comes down to.
Make sure you unbutton your sleeves.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that's a good connection. So hi,
Yeah, I love it.
what are we doing here
hello.
tonight, guys? Are we just talking about cows? Or?
We're here to talk about you and the
Beer
things
and
that you're
cows?
producing.
Well,
Beer and
first
cows.
there
And
is a
dairy
song.
cows.
There's a song about your people called Stronger Beer, about how Canadians have it better because they can get drunk cheaper because your beer is stronger.
It's off by like 2 or 3%, isn't it? Like the average difference in
Just
alcohol.
about, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a
Um,
lot.
We used to travel to Vancouver when I was stationed up in Washington State, so we could get, well, one, the drinking age wasn't 21. We could go over there and hit a bar at 18, 19 years old, kind of like Mexico, but far prettier. And yeah, we used to do that. And then the alcohol percentage, like you drink one beer, being lightweights because we're 18, 19-year-old soldiers. Like, oh my God, this Canadian beer is the shit. And then we would try to bring it back with us, and we'd always get hit by customs.
Well, at least you tried. You had the tenacity to try.
I felt obligated. I felt that I had to do that because I enjoyed the beer so much.
All right. Well, let's try and tie this into the topic here. So I'm by trade, I'm a tabletop.
My first bar fight was in a Canadian bar in Vancouver.
Well, there you go. A Canadian bar in Vancouver is probably the best place as any to get into a bar fight.
Yeah, I did okay. I didn't die.
Evidently.
Obviously.
But, yeah. For myself, I've been a tabletop role-playing game publisher for about 7 years now. I've worked in the traditional publishing space. I do trade magazines during the day, so I get to do the fun stuff, so to speak, at night with Radio James Games. The first game under this publishing house that I published was a martial arts game, a gritty urban try and die martial arts. All my other credits are with other publishing houses, so let's focus on this one. And then I'm returning this year doing a crowdfunder for a solo version of the game, because solo games are hot right now and they're fun, and it's exciting to get into that design space, certainly as a designer. And so I'm applying the rules of Fight to Survive role-playing martial arts meets heart to a solo game. To make this a little bit more of a circle, I designed both of these games because I had a rough growing up in a small town and would get into fights. And none of the role-playing games I found had anything to do with getting into a fight. And any of them were so heavily abstracted into just artificial number structures, or they were so intricate and gritty and balanced, like Eric Wujcik's Ninjas and Super Spies, that you had to have a black belt in order to understand what was going on. So I wanted a game where you could play martial arts and you didn't have to know martial arts, and it would feel intuitive, and it would feel like getting into a fight feels. I mean, obviously there's going to be some compromises, but I wanted to try and capture the rush of adrenaline, the sadness, the shock, because people, when they don't have a lot of experience in fights, they forget, like, as soon as you get punched in the face, your world changes, your perspective changes, you're not thinking anymore. And so how do you get into that? How do you try and capture that into a tabletop role-playing game system? And
a
then
device that punches you in the face that comes in the box. That's on a timer. So you don't know.
That's the stretch goal. That's the stretch goal, Nick. And so we're keeping it small.
I'm super excited about this.
Not everyone can afford the boxing glove on a spring.
I'll sell my stepson to get that.
Well, the point is, I really wanted to capture the spirit of getting into a fight, the good and the bad of that, right? Mostly the bad of that, but also how can we do that and celebrate the fun kind of media influences that we have. Things like Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport from 1988, which is glorious in its own way, and it's not very real, and it's exaggerated, it's emotional.
Oh
it's
yeah, Brick don't hit back. That's one of my
but
favorite lines from that movie.
It's
Brick
yeah,
don't
well,
hit
boards
back.
don't hit back. Technically that was from Enter the Dragon first. I'll
Yeah.
I'll point that out. But yeah, so I really wanted to indulge my love of those things, because I found that all the tabletop role-playing games are trying to emulate something like that were too fantastic and wanted you to throw fireballs and wanted to, you have to be able to run up walls and something. And Wuxia is a lot of fun, but I wanted something that was down to earth and was grounded, where just Jean-Claude Van Damme doing a whirlwind
Street
kick
level stuff
is wow. And like, we're gonna pretend that people don't just back up a little to get out of the way of that kick, but and
because they see it coming.
Yeah, well, it's pretty. I guess the idea is that you're just so caught up in the moment of martial prowess that you
right.
that you sucker somebody into getting hit 3 times. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that I would say that's 90% of a lot of martial arts, especially when you start getting into mixed martial arts. Because I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the 90s when that was fresh. I studied karate when I was a kid, a little bit of kickboxing and taekwondo, and every instructor is going to tell you it's a chess match. You're trying to outsmart the player that you're against, and martial arts is very same. So like, you kind of suspend disbelief when people start doing a tornado kick, things like that, because you're like, oh, okay, maybe there's an opportunity in there, and next thing you know, you're kicked in the face. You're like, I whatever the opportunity was, I missed it.
Well, I'll say that
now I don't have a tooth.
It's a chess match if you've got people on equal skill facing each other down, like at the point at which they know kind of your range of options and their range of options, then it becomes a chess match. But most fights you get into are not going to be with people who know how to fight, right? They're going to be people who are either overreacting to the circumstance, or they're shocked and they're scared, or they're both. Right?
Yeah, you start hitting that fight or flight.
And really, they're fighting themselves, and they're just coming out swinging.
Correct.
But I mean, that's getting a little bit off topic of the game. But like,
no, but it does bring up an interesting point, because that's usually called the universal fight plan, which is people that don't know how to fight. They're not trained in any type of what's the word I'm looking for? Discipline. They have the universal fight plan. They come out, they start throwing fucking. Sorry, family-oriented show. I dropped the F word. Bleep that. They start throwing haymakers and uppercuts, and the giant power moves.
Well, they start throwing haymakers until they get too close, and then try to jersey you and punch you in the stomach, right?
Right. Now, I was raised playing hockey, so my first instinct is to pull your shirt over your head and then just start throwing, jabs into your jaw until you stop fighting.
So I started martial arts. Well, first I did the 1980s kid thing, and I did the Chuck Norris Karate Studio stuff back in the day. Because they had, if you signed up every so often, you get the 3 free lessons, and everyone would like quit after that, but you kept coming for those 3 free lessons.
Oh, I got a free key, which was awesome.
Nice. But other than that, I wrestled through high school, and so for me, my first instinct still go for the legs.
Now, would the Chuck Norris school have been Tang Soo Do properly, or was that by the time he transferred into it being Chuck Kundo, I think is what he called it, something like that?
I was a Chuck Kundo guy.
I think it was just, I thought it was just generic karate with his likeness.
Like I still remember the, it's very Karate Kid.
Well, I mean, I don't want to martial arts nerd out on you guys, but Tang Soo Do is like a Korean form of karate, and it was the basis that Chuck Norris had, and it was the martial art that Mike Stone knew, and Mike Stone did the choreography for the Karate Kid in 1984, and he modeled the Cobra Kai dojo after Tang Soo Do. So Johnny comes out doing Tang Soo Do moves, kind of, and then Daniel, I think, is Goju Ryu was the basis for. Somebody can correct me in the comments if
I'm sure they will, because the internet loves to do that.
So I did a quick Google search. And
is Tang Soo Do more aggressive?
Tang Soo Do is pretty balanced hand and foot. It's aggressive, and it's longer range than most of them tend to be tighter. Like Goju Ryu is more blocks and transitions into throws, like strike transitions into throws. From what I know, I haven't studied either of them. I've studied other things.
So I looked it up. The Chuck Norris system, which was formerly known as Chun Kook Do. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. So you were right that's what it was.
Oh, well, it started in 1990, so that wasn't.
Yeah,
I didn't do.
And it had changed officially. Named stuff was said it was 99. The name changed. I didn't think the studios were still there by then. Like you said, other than wrestling and judo as a kid on the Navy base, like that was it. But let's finish the introduction real quick. So we found
man. Like we went in both feet in, just talking about stuff.
No, it's good. It's good.
Pretty cool.
I didn't interrupt. So we tell you, dear listener, how we found him. So we found him on the Den of Sin, known as Twitter, last year when he was doing his Kickstarter pimping all over the place. But we're totally his favorites. He likes us best. He said so. Off the record, of course. So we're going to tell you about it. And so once we found him, now we have to test him. Last time he did the regular religion question. So this time we have a new one. Are you ready for this, James?
I am. My body is ready.
All right. So the religion of the throat punch: Three Ninjas, Lionheart, which is the 90s film with Van Damme, or Street Fighter.
Oh my God.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to give you a more complete answer than just saying one, which is to say that Three Ninjas didn't age well. Street Fighter, I have a special place in my heart for, like, especially, but it has to do with the balance of how cheesy it is, how wonderful Raul Julia is, and I don't know, the particular place it holds in action movie cinema. All I can imagine is how coked up Jean-Claude Van Damme was. Personally, I like Lionheart a lot. It's a kind of 80s martial arts movie that just happened to spill into the 90s a little. It's one of the quintessential, like, guy gets caught up in an underground fighting ring movies. It's passionate. It's interesting. It's got some great shots. Curiously, if you look at the plot of it again, it's got some atypical things. It starts off as a revenge story, but with a guy's brother being killed. But as soon as he gets there, the guys who killed his brother are in jail and it's over. Yeah. So the whole movie becomes about trying to support the wife and kid that he left behind. And that's very strange for a movie like that. That's very atypical. And I think it's a lot more interesting than people sometimes give it credit for. Internationally, it was known for a lot of different titles, like Wrong Bet, because at the end of the movie, you know, when his friend has bet against him and he's like, wrong bet, because, you know, he's going to win after all against Attila. No, I really like it. I watched that movie, not regularly, but like I've watched it quite a few times.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point, because you don't really see that in cinema, where the motivation changes. I don't want to say mid-film, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Usually the motivation is established early on of why the hero, the protagonist, is doing what he's doing.
And it's also got some interesting relationships. Like, you've got this rich woman who kind of wants Jean-Claude Van Damme under her thumb. And the implication is that he sleeps with her. And that's a very strange relationship. And I feel like the same script, if somebody had approached it more intensely, could have really sung. But I really like it because, like a lot of genre films, it's meaningful in terms of how much you get out of it, not necessarily how much of it is on the screen.
Here's where I get artsy fartsy, as JR likes to point out. With Lionheart, it had some very gladiatorial ancient Rome themes. So you had the fighter that was doing well, where in gladiator times, women would pay exuberant amounts of money to have a single night relation or encounter with said gladiator. So, no, I'm with you, Lionheart. I just think the question, if you're going to throw in two Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, why not throw in Bloodsport or Double Impact?
Well, you know? Because Bloodsport, I love Double Impact, because I think he doesn't get enough credit for how humorously he played him against himself.
I did not walk out of that film. Yeah. I walked out of the one where he was with the basketball player.
Oh, with the tiger at the end with Mickey Rourke?
Yeah. Oh, so horrible. So bad.
Well, I mean, he went through waves, right? But like, as far as I'm concerned, Bloodsport is kind of the perfect American martial arts film.
It really is.
So, I mean, I think that Bloodsport 2 doesn't get enough credit. And there are other many fine, like Kickboxer, but there's many fine American martial arts films that don't get a lot of hype, like King of Kickboxers with Billy Banks, for instance, was a great American martial arts film. It was choreographed by, I think, Corey Yoon. But Bloodsport, it's hard not to hold it up. And
Billy Blanks was a good friend of my father.
Well, he's a nice guy.
He's an amazing dude. I got to meet him when I was like 7. My dad was
awesome. That's great.
One of the coolest dudes I ever met. Like super uplifting, super motivational. Like his energy was just crazy. It made me think I could roundhouse kick a mountain. He was.
There's a reason why he motivated America with Taibo in the late 90s. But for me, a particular scene in Bloodsport is what made me write the role-playing game Fight to Survive, which is he's on the Hong Kong bus and he's touring around, and you got Stan Bush playing in the background some like cheesy song called On My Own, and Jean-Claude Van Damme is being contemplative. He's full acting mode, right? And then he sees his enemy Chong Li in a reflection in the mirror and goes, and then, it turns out he's not actually there. And I was watching that and I thought, well, damn, I freaking love this stuff. Like this is it's emotional, it's neat, it's interesting, it resonates. And this in a genre that is often maligned for poor storytelling, right? But I think he was very emotive in that movie. I think to me, he communicated an awful lot of passion as a child in ways that I don't know, like a lot of TV when you're a kid is just people talking about stuff you don't really understand. I completely understood what Jean-Claude Van Damme was doing. When he's like searching around because he's blind, I'm like, oh no, Jean-Claude Van Damme. It made a lot of sense.
And the arena is slanted at that point.
Yeah, it is.
That's one of my favorite guilty pleasure movies.
Absolutely. So I wanted to make a role-playing game where things like that actually came up in a relevant way mechanically. So I did that with Fight to Survive in a way that you are martial fellows, and then now I'm doing it again with Solo Martial Blues in a way where you are just one lonely fighter trying to make it on your own, and has all the themes of isolation and you against the world that a lot of those genre films do.
That's a very interesting premise. Did you find it challenging to make it because it's single player, right? So you play by yourself.
Yes.
In a world of tabletop games where it's usually they gear it towards a group, did you find that challenging to strip away the group to make it a single player entity that you felt fulfilled in moving forward?
I did, because in the tabletop game, it's pretty baked into the rules why you need each other. Because a lot of the one problem that keeps coming up in designing tabletop role-playing games in general is like, oh, you're all different weird characters. We're just going to kind of pretend that you need each other. We're just going to suspend disbelief that you need to be on this quest.
The bard needs the paladin, needs the elf.
Exactly. Well, especially when everybody is like very, very wacky things. You've got this guy is a human rabbit who is a samurai, and then this person is a computer hacker with a laser eye. And like, how do these people even know each other? Why do they have anything to do with each other? So, and a lot of systems.
Just put a Saki Yojimbo in my head. Well, the rabbit samurai.
It was just to the top of mind, I guess. But the point is, it's an invisible wall that you are going to do stuff together. So I wanted to make sure that in Fight to Survive, there was a mechanical reason for you to be traveling as martial fellows and fighting together.
Right.
Trying to strip that out for Solo Martial Blues was challenging, but there are lots of amazing one-player tabletop role-playing games out there now. And the space, you can kind of argue that one-player tabletop role-playing games go back to the 70s, kind of, but by and large, the space has only really blossomed in the last 5-ish years. And so you have games like Iron Sword and 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, which are doing really exciting things with the mechanics involved. But a lot of those are story prompt games. And that can be great for some people, and other people are like, I don't know what to do with that, because it'll give you a prompt like, oh no, you're betrayed by your closest ally, and I'll be playing, and I'll be like, I don't know, is my cat my closest ally? I don't know what to do next. So in approaching Solo Martial Blues, I was trying to make it a little bit less story prompt, a little bit more guided, so that everything that happens within it is brief enough and springboards into the action of the person playing it, so that the game is kind of like a dialogue between the text as it is represented and the player that's playing. So the real juicy stuff kind of happens in your own head, so to speak.
Okay.
The text calls upon you to reflect on this and reflect on that's happening as it goes along. So just like my enjoyment of Lionheart or my enjoyment of Street Fighter from 1994, a lot of it is what you're bringing to it and how you're thinking about it and how amused or enjoyable it is for you. So that was the design challenge with Solo Martial Blues.
Okay.
I think we got it. I think we nailed it. See, it started as a Kickstarter goal or a stretch goal from the Kickstarter that was left over from Fight to Survive. I promised Fight to Survive a kind of 50-page solo update to the rules. Instead, I way over delivered and delivered a 124-page entirely standalone game. So this is me crowdfunding that 124 pages to expand it into about 200 to make it even just more stuff. It's already complete. It's already written. It's just, let's make it more. And then we've got great art by Stephen Wu, sorry. And he did stuff in Fight to Survive, and he's doing stuff here now. And we couldn't be more excited.
That's really cool. What I like about everything that you're doing right now is, first, it's street level stuff. It's solo player, which, like, this is new to me because I'm a D&D guy. I'm a, usually I'm playing with a group of people, like 3 or 4 or even more. So to have a solo adventure like that, that's pretty amazing. I didn't even know this was a thing, so it's opened my eyes to that. So
it is a thing.
I'm going to throw money at you.
I mean, to me, Nick,
Kickstarter.
To me, the most important part of role-playing games is the social connection of having people around the table and playing off each other.
Right.
But lots of people, for lots of reasons, would like to play alone. Or maybe it's accessibility, or maybe they just don't have the schedules lined up, or maybe they just want to do
getting a game together is a pain in the ass.
Exactly. The biggest enemy of a role-playing game is scheduling, right?
Right.
So
like
you can sit down.
Space shuttle.
You can sit down with a solo role-playing game and you can play it for yourself. The challenge, though, is to design it around self-discipline, because the game stops as soon as you close it, right? So how do you make it so that it's engaging enough and interesting enough that you don't want to put it down? And I know that sounds a little bit juvenile, but like, how do you do that without writing a novel? Because you don't want to write a novel. Then it's a novel. Then you're reading a novel, and I don't want to write a novel. I don't want to present.
I want to play a game.
You want to play a game. Exactly. That's what you came for. So you've got to make it a game that you're interacting with it so much that you want to keep going. And so that's been the challenge with Solo Martial Blues. And it's I like it because I finally get to play the game. I run games of Fight to Survive, but here it's with Solo Martial Blues, I actually get to play. And it's been a wild ride.
It sounds like you've written it where you could do things like, I'm a huge Daredevil fan. I'm a comic book fan. Like, I could play this game and not, cross any boundaries with some intellectual properties. I can pretend that I'm Daredevil, right?
I mean, the path that you're set on in terms of a story is a little bit more restrictive than just pretending that you're Daredevil. But I also love Daredevil. I love what it kind of accidentally fell into, which is ninjas on rooftops.
Yes,
and
huge fan.
And everything that Ninja Turtles did as a spoof on Daredevil, that kind of continued and extended that genre of street level superheroes.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and this is not street level superheroes, but it's a little bit more shrunken than that. It's kind of like the hyper reality that exists in a video game like Final Fight.
Oh, I love Final Fight. Double Dragon is. Would you say
Double
Double
Dragon,
Dragon
exactly.
into that?
Absolutely.
So what would the age range be for this game, like for your player, for your ideal audience?
Oh, I never even thought about that. Anybody who is willing to pick up a pencil and sit down and focus on these things, because like old fighting fantasy single player games in the 80s were marketed to kids. I mean, it said like 8+, I think, on the back of those. And that's theoretically possible. There's nothing in the game that's too violent or too sexy or too whatever else. I'm not even sure if I curse in it. I think I might say damn or something at some point.
Oh no, not damn.
I don't know if that's still considered a curse word. If Patrick Stewart can say damn on Star Trek The Next Generation, I'm not sure if it still gets to be a curse word anymore.
Oh my.
But yeah, it can work. Anybody who has an interest in the genre. I express my love for things like Bloodsport and 80s and 90s action movies, et cetera, et cetera. It is not necessary that you are steeped in those references in order to understand this. The structure of it is that you're just a lonely fighter. You come into town, you've got various reasons to come into town, and you're going to get embroiled in a Yojimbo-like fashion into all of the politics and violence of what's going on in the crummy little area of New Hope City where you've set up shop. And you can let the whole thing follow you along. If you ever watched Streets of Fire, the 1984 film with Willem Dafoe, a lot of inspiration is taken from that, the rock and roll fable. It's a great movie. Cool. It's a great hero movie, but it's a great movie.
What made you decide to take this one to crowdfunder instead of Kickstarter again?
Well, there's a few reasons, JR. One of them is that I no discredit to Kickstarter. I'm going back to Kickstarter for other things. I think the industry in general would benefit from Kickstarter having a little bit more competition because it's the 500-pound gorilla in the room. And I will be back to Kickstarter, but we've got Backer Kit that's coming up from behind, so to speak. That's in a much better position than it was a year ago. GameFound, not so hot, but it's still trying, and some other platforms. Crowdfunder was very nice, so I decided to partner with them for their tabletop non-stop event, which is happening throughout the month of February. So this game, Solo Martial Blues, is part of Tabletop Nonstop. Part of that is that they're doing a bunch of promotion for it. And part of it is that they're a little bit friendlier for me in terms of accounting for being Canadian. So,
okay. Yeah.
Which is handy. We'll see. The problem is Kickstarter still is the place with all the eyes. So people who are just casually browsing for a game are going to come upon it upon Kickstarter. Nobody is going to casually browse through Crowdfunder yet. Maybe 5 years from now, 3 years from now, whatever.
Yeah, if you give it time.
Yeah, but right now, anybody who's looking for Solo Martial Blues is just going to have to go to Crowdfunder and find it, which is, it as a publisher and not the best for the campaign, but if we can help to grow the platform, then hooray. Oh, and also it's slightly cheaper for me, Crowdfunder, because it doesn't take a cut. Instead, Kickstarter takes 7% or 8%, and then it also takes another 7% from Stripe or PayPal when it processes the fees. Crowdfunder doesn't take anything. Instead, they just offer a tip jar for when people are donating, and then they can put a dollar or two or whatever what they like into the pot for Crowdfunder. And I said to them, "Oh, does that actually break even? Is that, do people tip that much?" And they said, "Actually, we make more money when people do that than taking a percentage." And I'm like, "Well, damn, let's believe in people."
Nick and I both used the GameFound because we did, was it Acheron, the space game?
Yeah, which I won't get for another
year and a half,
10 months, and I can't wait to play it so I can beat your ass on air.
We did have a bet going, but that was the game where we didn't take into account, because we both kept, this new thing, let's back it, and upping our pledge, and then they don't close the foreign conversion because it's not an American company that was doing it. And for whatever luck, the dollar to whatever that was tanked that day. So we ended up paying a lot more than we thought we would.
I spent so much damn money on the extras. It was so awesome. I mean, I'm not mad about it. I'm not
me
mad
either.
about it because I got some
Stabby
really cool
was.
ships.
He was like, JR, stop telling him about this stuff.
Yeah, stab me.
So
Hence her
speaking
namesake.
of upgrades, what kind of, like, normally like a crowdfunding will be like stretch type goals. What do you have for this one for Martial Blues as stretch goals?
Well, first of all, Solar Martial Blues is in American dollars because
Awesome.
2/3 of my backers from Fight to Survive were in the United States. And then a reasonable chunk of them were from Great Britain. And only a minority of them were from Canada and then other European countries. So I decided to go ahead with Solar Martial Blues in US dollar. And so that's that. Let's talk about what stretch goals are, JR. So often, like, this is like the fourth crowdfunding event I've led. So often a project can get stuck in its stretch goals. As a publisher, I don't want to take any risks. I want this thing to be done before I even bring it to crowdfunding, and Solar Martial Blues is done. I'm presenting a done thing. Is it great to be using this as a pre-order model? Well, I mean, it's the way crowdfunding has gone, certainly, and it's not something that I always want to be the case. But in this case, like, I don't want to be asking the questions of what am I doing after the thing funds. So let's finish it, put it up. In terms of stretch goals, each of the stretch goals for this project are just adding more content to the book. So people get to choose how big this book is going to end up. So I don't spend, ages and ages trying to fulfill this thing, and it can get out the door fairly immediately. Like, it's always better to under promise and overperform. So that's the structure I'm going with here. So right now there's 3 years of content because you move through the years as you play. And I've got 2 more years written and ready to get laid out and to do. And if the campaign meets its goal, that's what it'll be. But if it gets higher and higher and higher and higher, I'm adding more and more and more years. And then I've got 10 years of content planned out so that you actually move your character through a whole decade. And we'll see if we get there.
There's possible, because I can look at the metrics behind the scenes. We had you here for your Kickstarter last year for Fight to Survive, and we still get periodic episodes that people are watching it now. So we asked you this then, and I'm going to ask you again. When this campaign is over, if people just happen to find this episode 6 months from now and they're like, man, that sounds cool, I missed the Kickstarter, are you going to move it for sale anywhere else after the Kickstarter or crowdfunder?
Absolutely. You can go to the Radio James Games website and it will be able to direct you to wherever it's being put up. It's going to be put up the same places where I put up Fight to Survive, which is Drive-Thru-RPG. It's going to be available both as a PDF and print on demand. It's going to be up on itch.io.
I love Drive-Thru.
It's going to be through itch.io, and it's also going to it'll be distributed through Indie Press Revolution, which Fight to Survive is distributed through now, and through the Canadian distributor Compose Dream Games, who sometimes tours Europe and Australia as well, doing convention support and selling the book. And also the Indie Game Developer Network will be carrying a copy as well, touring the conventions in the United States, like the bigger ones, Origins, Gen Con, Fan Expo, things like that.
So
Nick was just telling me. Oh, sorry.
Will this be available for sale on places like Barnes & Noble and in traditional book markets, Amazon, that kind of stuff?
As a I picked Indie Press Revolution as the main distributor of this, and retailers can purchase through Indie Press Revolution. So, for instance, my local FLGS stocks the book through IPR, through Indie Press Revolution. I sometimes get emails from strange places like Spain and Greece and whatever else being like, I just bought your book in my local store. Can you send me the PDF? And I'll be like, yes, bits and mortar. Here you go. So as a retail distributor, IPR is the one that is pretty much the best one to go with for things like this, I think.
Okay. So are you going to be having like downloadable, if someone buys a physical copy, where they can download like the character sheets so that way they can constantly print those? Because, as you play your character, that kind of stuff changes constantly. I mean, you go through dozens of those sheets sometimes in one setting as you erase and update.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to restrain myself giving out downloadable content, because you can always add on to things and little reference sheets and character sheets and whatever else. So absolutely. And in fact, if anybody buys the physical copy, I'll give them the PDF. Like, you got to have these things across multiple platforms in order to play them. People are playing things in very different ways. Like, I have this fantastic 10-inch tablet that I've been going through, like reading all kinds of tabletop role-playing game books on. And that's sometimes how people interpret media these days. And that's wonderful. So yeah, I'll have downloads, man. I'm not sure exactly the best way to host those downloads right now. Like right now, if you go to DriveThruRPG and click on Fight to Survive and you buy it, it comes, you get the PDF, you get the character sheets, a black and white character sheet, a color character sheet, and a black and white and color character sheet that's form fillable, and a booklet of stock characters, and et cetera, et cetera. You just keep adding on. But I want to make them, I should just put them up on my website as well as resources that people can download, like a resources tab. So it's probably going to end up there as well.
Okay, that sounds fun. How much have you had to test this? Because I mean, you said you don't get to play the other game as much because you're game mastering, I guess.
Well, I'm running it. Yeah.
what do you call your person running the other one? Is it game master? Is it?
It's game master. And it's game master because I didn't. I mean, it's already a pretty weird game. I didn't want to like also say, oh, the game master's called a referee. I guess I could have, but it was fine. They're still game mastering. How was Solo Martial Blues tested? It was generously tested by the Kickstarter backers from Fight to Survive. The bunch of people put up their hand, because the one question I kept getting with Fight to Survive is, oh, that's great. Awesome. I don't have any friends. Where's the solo rule? And I love the idea, but I can't find anybody to play with. Or, I mean, let's be perfectly clear. This is a weirdo niche indie game. It's sometimes more difficult to drum up a group to play something like gritty martial arts than it is to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So some people their loss, but still, like, we bend to as a willow in the wind. Like, these things are these things. So people really were eager for a solo game. So I said, okay, fine. If you're so eager for a solo game, you can be on the playtesting group. And so threw together a big playtesting group, got a bunch of feedback. It was all very encouraging. Like, this is traumatizing. I am upset. Why did you do this to me? Things like that. I was like, okay, good progress. And so it's been playtested for about 6 months. And not just me. It's really important. Some people say playtesting isn't important. I think it's super important, because half the things that I think make sense in my brain may not make sense, getting out into the world. So it's been playtested that way, and it's nice and polished at this point. Yeah.
So when I first got into gaming, I noticed, especially in the indie side of the game, tabletop games, a lot of them were written with the presumption that the person reading the game knew the basics of tabletop role-playing games. So it started like you already had to be in the know, which made it very inaccessible for someone who had no clue what they were doing. Right. So do you feel like your game, based on your experience both playing games and designing games, is very friendly for noobs?
No. Sorry, JR. It is a diceless game with move comparison, and it makes perfect sense in and of, maybe, because half of what I do at the table when I'm running it in conventions and things, and I'm going to be at Breakout in a month from now in Toronto, which is the biggest convention in Canada, running this game. Half of what I have to do when I'm teaching the game to people, and they always get it by the end of the session. It always makes sense by the end of the session. But half of it is kind of unworking all the lessons they have in their brains about Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dungeons and Dragons, you get into a mentality of, what do you do in a turn? What is a segment of time? Oh, well, you move and you do a big action, and then maybe you do a little action. And I'm like, well, lots of other games think about time differently, and they think about what you're allowed to do within that space differently. And I've seen other games completely break people who are too accustomed to Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't mean to get on the case of Dungeons and Dragons. I play it, I run it. But I've seen people have a hard time adjusting to, what do you mean I only get one action a turn? What do you mean? So with things like Solo Martial Blues or things like Fight to Survive, the segment of time is very different, and the way that you interpret your behavior is very different. So in some ways, it might be easier for somebody coming to it completely fresh and being like, this is your first role-playing game, because you don't have those preconceived notions about how you divide your time and your behavior and your lens for interacting with the world. Everything you need is laid out in the book. If somebody discovered this in the desert in a Ziploc bag and was like, oh, gee, I'm stuck in the desert. I guess if you were stuck in the desert, you'd be doing a lot of walking. But let's say you're on desert island, and you're marooned there, and you open this up, you could play it completely and fully. It doesn't devote a particular length of time to this is a role-playing game, but it's kind of conceptually, it's kind of out there in the indie scene. So I don't know if it would be somebody's best first role-playing game, but if it's yours, dear listener, if somebody's listening to this and it's your first game, let me know how it went. Because I'm always shocked and surprised when people talk to me about how they've got a weekly game going. And I'm like, what, really? Okay, all right. And then they start talking with me about the rules and engaging about concepts, like a throwaway line that I put in some, I don't know, photo caption. And they're like, so whatever happened to that? And I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing. So you never know how much people are going to connect with the material and how much they're going to run with it. I think you can really connect and run with it in this case. And I think that Solo Martial Blues is going to be something very special.
Well, I just backed it, so I'll let you know when I get it.
Well, we own Fight to Survive too.
I never got a chance to play it.
I just packed it.
We just packed it for the move, and it's still wrapped up.
Oh.
But
we're going to pause right now because we're listing you as the sponsor, so that way people can dive into this product. 4614. But with that being said, Nick, what do you think about the art? Because I noticed you like to get nerdy about the art. Do you approve of this kind of style?
Go back to the last one. Yeah, I dig that art because it takes me back to when I was a kid playing Double Dragon, or I was playing Ninja Gaiden. You know, you got the right tropes going on that just reflect nostalgia of that time period. So you got the ninja with the kabuki mask, which is probably not the right name, but someone's going to correct me on the internet because that's what the internet's for. But listening to how he talks about the gameplay and how the mechanics work, I was like, oh, I don't have to have 3 to 4 friends to play this. I can play it anytime I want. So that with the artwork is amazing because it's everything that I want in a street fighting type of game. You know, I want the cityscape. I want the moon. I want some sort of scary boss, you know. Even the logo type, you know, the typography of it. Typography, not topography. So please don't correct me on that, internet. The typography of it. It all fits, and it hits everything personally to me of something I want to buy. So I get to do this single-playing role-playing game, which up until I was today years old when I figured out that was a thing, because I didn't know that was a thing before. I thought I needed like 3 or 4 friends, and you know, like Dungeons and Dragons or any of those other types of games. But the artwork's amazing. I think whoever did the art did a really amazing job. Everything's well balanced. It's well colored and toned for the subject matter, and I mean, like I said, I backed it. So I gave $75 of my hard-earned money to make this thing happen because I believe in this project and I want to play it.
The art that you're looking at right now is the new cover as of a week ago or so. The previous art that you had up was the art that was commissioned for the Kickstarter backers from the previous game. And that was a kind of a, we didn't have a long time to run at that one. I just wanted something splashy that could go out. So that was the cover for the Kickstarter backers solo version. The substantially expanded one that's being crowdfunded, where I'm hoping to put in as much new art as possible, is the darker cover with the bright red solo. Not everybody was as fond of my chrome letters, but
to be honest, it makes me want to generate some fan art.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think I also sent you the cover, the book cover itself. Well, that's one of the black and white interiors. Is like treating it like a first person perspective as he's walking forward, or as you're walking forward. It was really important to me
first person puncher.
Yeah,
because it's not a shooter.
It was important to me that the main character is not defined in any of the art, because the main character could be anyone. You could be I don't know, a big hulking wrestling woman with a giant ponytail, or you could be a tiny little fellow in a leather jacket, or you could be however you want to bring yourself into the game. There's ways to mechanically reinforce what you decide to look like and how you want to approach that. So it was really important to keep the protagonist character off the art and out of descriptions. So that
it could be anybody, right?
Yep. So you could reapproach it in completely different ways. If you
the
want.
Guy on the right, definitely giving me vibes of one of the antagonists from the Karate Kid movie, like the guy from the Cobra Kai.
Oh, that's Johnny, man.
Yeah,
kind of like a Dirty Johnny going on there.
Yeah. He just needs the headband.
You talked about there's the actual book cover right there. So he's dangling a glowing medallion, and there's two people facing off. There's flames around a city. There's a biker gang going by, and I was very inspired by, I don't know how, you mentioned Double Dragon earlier. Double Dragon 2 had the most amazing cover. And I remember it very clearly from comic book advertisements. It was two guys trying to fight their way up like a kind of a stairwell and holding on to the girl that they were rescuing, and a bunch of thugs trying to come up after them. And in a way, it was better than the game. Like Double Dragon 2 is a great game, but that art was phenomenal, and it endlessly inspired me. And I'm very, very inspired by a lot of the cover art and posters from those 80s martial arts movies that we mentioned. Like Chuck Norris's Octagon, for instance, had fantastic posters. Both the general release poster and the pre-release poster that was just Richard Norton as in a mask outfit, like bursting out of some paper for some reason. I also love that poster a lot. So I wanted to capture, the game is not 80s, but my heart is. So I wanted to capture what would look good in terms of that genre of displaying the emotion and the action of what's going on. Because movie posters now are just, I don't want to be old man yells at clouds, but a lot of movie posters now are just all the actors on the poster.
Yell at them, yell at the clouds.
And that's my cloud yelling rant. I miss when movie posters tried to convey a message about what the film means. And so similarly, the game is trying to communicate what it means.
No, you're absolutely right, because we talked about this before we started about Ninja 3.
Ninja 3, the Domination, yes.
The Domination. It was a movie poster that was in my room until I was like 17, 18 years old.
And it belongs there. It's an amazing poster. Like
it's right next to my Megadeth rest in peace poster.
It's got an unusual color palette. Like it's got a lot of action going on. There's a helicopter on it. Like it's an amazing one.
It's one of those favorite like nostalgia movies that I like. Like I can't find anything to watch on any of the streaming services. I'm like, where's Ninja 3 being played right now? Excuse me. And
Enter the Ninja and Ninja 2: The Revenge are not a slouch either, right? Is it called Ninja?
No, it goes hard.
Revenge of the Ninja. Yeah.
That whole all those movies, they go super hard, and you're like, a little white kid from suburbia and middle of America like I was like, man, these are the coolest movies ever made. That was like my version of the Avengers before the Avengers got made.
Well, Sho Katsugi was a very talented man, or I think he still is a very talented man. And I think that Black Eagle doesn't nearly get enough respect, right?
I think you're right. Yeah, Black Eagle's top notch.
I mean, people make fun of it now. I loved it. I thought it was great. Jean-Claude Van Damme was a wonderful, menacing villain. Sho Katsugi was a great hero in that movie, and I've watched it a dozen times.
Oh, same.
Yeah. I feel like we could be friends Nick. I'll be honest.
Yeah, like we're gonna be best
together,
friends.
watch
You're gonna be
movies.
my new Canadian ambassador. It's gonna be awesome.
So back to the game, like, is this going to be paperback only? I mean, obviously you're going to have digital copies, or are you going to have hardback versions?
Oh, definitely. There's the Kickstarter is for release of a print-on-demand code, so you can print off a copy of the book. It's intended to be soft cover. I wasn't intending to make a hardcover. I might, just in case, because it's not much more work on my side, right? I just have to do another cover file for it. So it'll be out in soft cover and in hardcover. I want to try and keep it slim enough so that it's nice and conveniently sized. Fight to Survive was a bit big, right? It was 336 pages or something. But let's keep this one nice and small so that people can actually carry it around. And I'd like to imagine it going to coffee shops or something, so people can just sit there and play the game as they're having a coffee or something. So I want to keep it light and portable, if that's the case.
Well, if you're going to a coffee shop, spills happen. You might want to buy 2 or 3 just in case.
Well, then it's even better because you've literally fought your way through the text, right? You're like, oh yeah, I fought that guy who was trying to mug me, and there's the bits of cappuccino he spills all over the.
So you said the art was by Stephen Wu.
Yeah.
Was he the artist from the first Fight to Survive game, or how did you get in touch with him?
He did much of the art he did about a quarter of the art in Fight to Survive, and some of the best pieces, certainly. I know I will say that about all the artists in Fight to Survive because I loved everything they did. But Stephen Wu did a number of the pieces, and he's also, you may know him also, he did the indie darling Jinkashi Blood at the Banquet Hall that was distributed by Wedding Games, about a family of Chinese restaurant owners fighting hopping vampires. Wonderful game, fantastic game. He did a lot of the interior art for that. His other credits are just too numerous to mention. Like, I can stand here all day listing the cool stuff he's done. But yeah, he's a very accomplished artist. We're incredibly lucky that he decided to come on to this and to continue doing stuff in this vein. So I've got him, I've got an editor because, everybody needs an editor, and a sensitivity reader because we're juggling topics here. We're juggling sensitive topics, things like economic oppression and fighting your way up from the streets. There's necessarily a lot of classism going on in that structure, and we're balancing a lot of different cultural backgrounds. So we've got a sensitivity reader, and we've got me, I guess, when I'm doing writing and development and layout and everything else.
Okay. That sounds interesting. Was that something that became an issue with the sensitivity reader? I don't know anyone who's actually used one before.
Well, here's the thing, JR, I'm, however well read I think I am, I'm still putting my foot in my mouth all the time, and I don't want to do that in print. So for a couple $100, it's worth having someone else look it over and make suggestions and say, are you aware that what you're saying here has these implications? And I'll go, oh God, no, I didn't want to say that. Like, I'm just working from my own limited perspective. So a sensitivity reader is really important to try and expand that perspective and give input on how things might be otherwise read, because that's not what an editor is doing. An editor is working from kind of top content and saying, oh, not just proofing, but like saying, oh, is this section really needed because you've got the same stuff over here, or you didn't really explain this well enough, or things like that. So they're thinking kind of at the higher view and at a finer view, whereas a sensitivity reader will say, well, sometimes the sensitivity reader is just bringing up conversations like, well, what does it mean to have a ninja now? What does that mean? Is that something we're prepared for? Does it mean what it used to mean? Are we treating it with enough respect? Because when I think of ninjas, I think of, and I don't know if you've gone down this rabbit hole, Nick, but I think of the Kage no Gundam, like Sonny Chiba, 80s action TV shows, which I love.
Yeah, and then
incredibly.
Went from that to Michael Dudikoff with American Ninja.
Yeah, these are very different worlds.
Which
right?
also plays into G.I. Joe with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow.
And I love G.I. Joe. And Larry Hama is an amazing writer for those G.I. Joe comics.
I would like to think that I was the amateur ninja historian in the 1980s at a very young age. Because I love the lore. You know, I loved the imagery. I loved what they. I mean, they were assassins. I guess I can't say I loved what they represented because that made me seem like a dick. But
But still,
they
I
did
think
have cool iconography and they had cool lore.
well, and there's a lot of cool stuff about ninjas that are just things that have come up over cultural exchange. A lot of martial arts in history has developed over cultural exchange, both
Right.
in great ways and in sometimes in not so great ways. Like kung fu, for instance, is not a word that is used in Chinese. It's not a word in Mandarin or in Cantonese. It's an invention of the United States, of people, Westerners, who
Right.
heard the term gong fu, as gong fu was one word, and adapted it because what American military men who were coming back from the war, what they knew was karate with a hard K. So that became kung fu. So can you say that the term kung fu is inappropriate? Well, it's more complicated than that because this whole structure involves a tremendous amount of cultural exchange that's happening across the entire world. And martial arts are in many ways a human invention, but it's still worth stopping, having those conversations and going, checking our intentions and making sure that we're representing things in a fair way. Like in Fight to Survive, I gave a whole paragraph to what do we mean when we say kung fu? Well,
Right.
it kind of isn't even a term because like it kind of doesn't exist because really it's saying it's a reference to all Chinese martial arts that have nothing to do with each other in some cases. And there are thousands of them. So,
There are town to
so
town.
so if you're going to say
Like,
somebody studies kung fu, that's an empty glass. What is
right.
what does that mean? It
Well,
could mean
it's kind of.
something.
I always equated it to like Germany having a brewery in every town. Well, you go to China, every village town had its own style of martial arts that they called different things.
Yeah, and
So,
some of them came together, and some of them split apart, and some of them people migrated. So now you've got like a lot of what we think of as Chinese food came out of San Francisco, right?
or New York. Yeah.
Exactly, like New York inventing the pizza. So we're in the middle of huge tides of cultural exchange and change, and people bringing new things into their lives. Like the Russians didn't have vodka until the potato came from the New World, and
Right.
it's a part of heritage now. Um, yeah, so we're all involved in these tides of history, and I think that in martial arts, especially, is a subject that people can get sensitive about in terms of cultural authenticity. So it's important to approach the whole structure with sensitivity and to make sure that you're presenting something honestly and cleanly and that it meets your intentions. So that's a very long answer to say. I think
So
a
you did
sensitivity reader was probably wise in this case.
fair. So I know the closest I came is I've written Australians, and I was told I needed an insensitivity reader because I made them too nice and they didn't cuss enough. But if I cussed in an American audience, Amazon would like censor it as adult content if I spoke how they speak on a regular basis, because some of their cultural norms, cussing wise, would be here considered, oh my goodness, stars and garters. But so that did get me thinking. Your answer about the sensitivity reader is those discussions. And for someone who's a nerd of all things like martial arts movies and karate and all the other forms of martial arts, like you and Nick were going on in the pre-show and during the show, there's not as many spaces where those people sit around and get nerdy because, you know, they're not that I've seen. So did you build, like, I don't know, is there a Discord server for your fighting games where people get together and can talk to build community around the fighting space that you've created?
Like most small publishers, I have a Discord that is ill-attended. So there is a Radio James Games Discord with all of, I think, 50 people on it, which I mostly use for announcements and things. And any discussions people want to have, I am happy to not do my work and instead discuss things like this. That's a great time
the
for
answer
me.
is yes. And if you want to have that conversation, the link to his Discord will be in the show notes. Because that sounds like the kind of things the people that would be willing to back this would be interested in talking about.
One of the things I love about Fight to Survive and about this game, Solo Martial Blues, is it brings out all of the martial arts nerds that also have an interest in tabletop role-playing games. And there's a lot of us. Like I studied different forms of kung fu for years. I'm in a regular judo class right now. I took karate when I was a kid. Like I've almost always been involved in some structure of martial arts or another. And it's people can get pretty deep down the rabbit hole of talking about their martial art, but they don't tend to talk across martial arts very often. So this has been a wonderful opportunity to talk to the karate nerds and to talk to the, different kung fu nerds. And I'm using nerds in a celebratory term,
Absolutely.
right? Like people who
It's
are
not a pejorative.
Yeah.
It's celebratory. It's
Yeah.
it's a term of endearment.
exactly
So-
because like I, as a self-identified nerd in both martial arts and tabletop role-playing games, it's great to see people, like-minded people, coming together to talk about things from their perspective. That's how we ended up with, there's over 50 martial arts in Fight to Survive, and some quite obscure ones too, like 52 blocks, for instance. I don't think has it been in any other martial arts game that I can think of. And I don't know. I had to restrain myself and cut about 10 styles of kung fu out of the game just because the chart would have just kept going forever.
Didn't that one have Jeet Kune Do in it?
Yeah, it has Jeet Kune Do in it, which isn't even a martial art, but whatever.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong with it.
I remember I chose that because it's the only one that I could recognize that I knew anything a little bit about. I wouldn't say I knew about it, but like I knew enough about it because Bruce Lee fan, obviously.
Well, I was trying, like, again, we're talking about trying to balance. I want people to be able to come to this I want people to celebrate who are martial arts geeks, and I want people to come to it who don't know anything about it. So in Fight to Survive, you got 5 basic martial arts you could choose from: kung fu, kickboxing, karate, wrestling, and boxing, right? And, as we discussed, 2 or 3 of those aren't even kind of martial arts, right?
Right.
The whole structure is complicated, but you can pick one of those 5. Or you can go to this list here of like 50 something and then break down all these different styles of karate that have nothing to do with each other and never met. Or all of these, if you really, really want to know the difference between like white eyebrows kung fu and white crane kung fu, then Tibetan white crane, then away we can go. So you can go in as far as you can. With solo martial blues, the whole thing had to be substantially simplified because it's not as open. You don't have a GM that's trying to lead you through it. So instead,
you're your own GM, right?
Yes. So instead, we're just focusing on a handful of martial arts that you can pick between and kind of weave through as you're picking your teachers through the text and following along on the teacher's story. Because something that happens, I don't mean to go on and on.
No.
One thing that happens with martial arts.
Dude, before I started talking to you, I didn't know how big of a martial arts geek I was.
I'm awakening things in you, Nick.
Yeah, like it's all, I wouldn't say triggering because it has a negative connotation to it, but I was like, it awakened a bunch of, activating a lot of memories of my fandom, and I just didn't have the words to express it, which is awesome. That's why I backed your game, because I'm going to play the shit out of it, man.
Well, I hope I'm doing that for other people too. Because, for instance, people, when you're studying martial arts, you have a very interesting relationship with your teacher, right?
Yeah.
And like somebody mentioned BJJ earlier, right? Like the whole, especially I find with BJJ clubs, like the upper students and the BJJ teacher always get really close, right? And it's
Julio Gracie choked me out with my own arm, which made me fall in love with the fighting style,
So all of what Solo Martial Blues does is you're not just learning a martial art from this teacher, you're developing a relationship with this teacher. And that could be going deep or that could be very shallow. And the kind of people who enter into martial arts on high levels, you've got to have a reason to be studying that much. And I've met some wonderful, interesting, passionate, like pure of heart people who are keen martial artists. But the scene is also filled with people who are a little weird, people who are kind of delusional, like your Frank Dukes types, and people who you just don't know how they got there. Right? Yeah, like so I wanted to play with how you've got different personalities and different influences and different characters that are already populating this martial arts scene. Let's bring them in to a narrative so that you can interact with them as a protagonist. So, for instance, one of the teachers that you get in Solo Martial Blues, he's a karate instructor, but he's a little violent, and you're not sure if you want to go down that rabbit hole. I mean,
Right.
or maybe you're not sure if you want to go down that rabbit hole. That's left up to you in the text, because it's all about hard choices. Do you want to keep learning karate from this guy who's a little extreme, or is that good? Or are you okay with that? Is that where you want to go? Or do you want to back off? Do you think that you do better training on your own? And so
would you say that it's based on like your acceptance of aggression levels?
Your acceptance of that, that is a huge topic, Nick, your acceptance of aggression levels, because how much of an edge do you have as a person? Like, for instance, myself, I never had, I could always recognize that I had the skill in fighting, but I never had that killer instinct. I never had that like finishing idea. And some people do. Some people will go right for your jugular, right? And more power to them.
No, I get that. That's how I was trained, because I was raised in the Ranger Regiment as a young adult male, and all we studied was BJJ and Krav Maga. The very aggressive fighting styles. It's to finish the fights, to remove your threat.
Absolutely. Krav Maga is a good example. If you're executing it properly, then you're breaking bones. Then you're severing.
Right.
Like
I dislocated my company commander's elbow in a sparring match on what we called Motivation Mondays in the little Quonset hut we had.
Take that motivation.
And he's like, "Who's the best fighter?" And my squad mates, I didn't think I was the best fighter. I'm very humble about this. I'm like, I was a mediocre fighter at best. I'm an artist by trade, So hurting another human being was something outside of my wheelhouse. Until I joined the military, I was trained to be that person. Really, I didn't want to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how that happened. We rumbled. We did the techniques that we were trained, and I found in a position where I could finish the fight, and I could finish it early.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of taking a tactical, a little tactical pause, going, maybe I should break the captain's arm. I broke the captain's arm.
So that does get me thinking. When Nick and I entered the Army in the 90s,
I'm old.
Yeah, the way we were taught at basic training was the good old-fashioned Army chop, which was basically like they're teaching you to do some crappy John Wayne like movie kung fu whatever from.
And they always told us it was enough they were only teaching you enough to get your ass kicked in a bar fight.
Right. But so eventually the military realized, hey, this is useless. I mean, it's great to get aggression out in a training field where you beat the crap out of each other and you don't like a guy in your basic training bay, like this dude's a loser. Let me pair up against him so I can beat his ass in training. Having said that, the Army quickly realized that's not useful in an actual fight where we might actually want our soldiers not to die.
Right. And so we developed the MACP.
The Marine Corps developed one way, the Army developed another. They tried a lot of methods. They ended up with something of a hodgepodge of a lot of styles. Does your game, because that's what happens when various styles come in contact with each other, does your game allow for that where you can mix and match the styles? Or
Absolutely, because the way that somebody who's not a martial artist would approach a martial arts game would be to say that you have one teacher and you stick with that one teacher forever. And that is just not how most martial artists work.
No,
you tend to go in and out of
5, masters or senseis.
Yeah, like you move or you get married and have to like do other things, or you just change in terms of your, like, for instance, I'm in judo right now because I really like how you can go all out in judo. And if you're doing it right, the crash mat will absorb the pressure. Whereas a lot of other martial arts, like Krav Maga, for instance, you can't ever go all out. Like, unless you're in a serious combat circumstance,
you're very limited. Somebody.
You're very limited on your execution. Even something like Wing Chun, for instance. I've known some people who've gotten some horrible injuries from Wing Chun because they flinched at the wrong time and they didn't get connected on the way the pushing hands was going and ended up with a split eye. But with judo, you can really push yourself hard for, and it still gets to be a friendly game. And how much of that is applicable to the street? Well, I mean, I'm in my 40s. I'm
Same.
I'm through with my street fighting days. I think I can afford to. Yeah.
It's like I say, I'm not too old to be into a fight, but I am too old to lose.
So in answer to your question, JR, the way I approached martial arts is that it's incredibly easy for you to look at that list and come up with your own structure of martial arts. There's more than enough examples. There's even a few examples of military, kind of military research martial arts structures like Systema and like Krav Maga that are included in the game, just to give people a sense of how it would go. The thing is, I mean, there's always compromise and things like this, but the structure was reduced down to a few base elements that you can toggle because you are more important than the martial art. The martial art is just giving you a way to learn, but what is really going on is still with you. So each of the characters have kind of 5 general moves, which is grapple, punch, kick, block, and footwork. So it's reducing all of martial arts kind of down to those 5 moves. What martial art you have helps you advance and train the technique in 1 or 2 or 3 of those things, and maybe gives you some weapons training. But it's still you who is doing the training. You're deciding where to put those pips to be a better boxer with your technique, or to be a better, like to increase your kick. It doesn't matter. To a certain extent, it doesn't matter what martial art you're choosing, because you, as an individual, you're making the choice. So that structure allowed it so that, yeah, you were studying, Western rushdown boxing for about 3 years, and then your teacher had a heart attack and had to stop training anymore, and now he's just convalescing, and he's still your friend, but you go to see him and stuff because you learned a lot about him and you invested in him, but now you're going to go out and learn something else. And that's when you started at a kickboxing gym that's down the road and developed a new teacher, and now you're training up other parts of yourself that you weren't training before. And so you have a martial career, and it becomes a lifestyle that you kind of structure through. And a big part of this is the nature of violence. Violence is terrible. And it's I can't tell you how many fights I would get into as a teenager, and you're thinking like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. Like, this is right. Not, it has a certain kind of perverse glory, but at the same time, like, you're afraid, and you're just one. Like, it's one thing to be fighting some guy and have it be honorable and sequestered, but that's not usually how these things go. Usually you're fighting some guy and you have to worry about his buddy coming up behind you and clocking you in the back of the head.
Right.
So it's, how do we take this aspect of violence, try to celebrate it and enjoy it on one hand, and also have a responsible perspective on it on the other hand? So that's the kind of tension at the heart of both Fight to Survive and Solo Martial Blues. Is you keep finding yourself as a character, you keep finding yourself in these violent situations, in this violent lifestyle. What are you doing to try and perpetuate this violence? How can you get out? How do you keep going in it? And so that's the heart of the game, really. It's martial arts meets heart.
Well, I think that's a very interesting thing, is that you put a sense of morality into it.
Speaking of morality, in real fighting, if you're playing in any kind of competitive circuits, like, certain people get reputations like, oh, this is the jerk that'll sucker punch you or whatever, skirts the letter of the rules. Is there any mechanism in your game for like that kind of consequence for your actions?
Oh, like, okay. Well, first of all, there is a mechanism in the game for doing things like that. Like, I don't know. You talked to Nick about a bar fight earlier. One of my favorite old techniques was the car keys. You throw the car keys up in the air, and then when they're looking up at the car keys, so like, there are things like a sucker punch structure that have worked into the game that make a lot of sense, that make things like reenacting Roadhouse a lot more accessible, or the bar fight in Best of the Best. But
Roadhouse.
but in the so those kinds of structures are possible. Do they have repercussions? Well, yes, absolutely. Your reputation is everything, and how the other NPCs and how these characters interact with you, and what you do about it, can determine your fate as a character in terms of life and death. Certainly, that's true of Fight to Survive. Solo Martial Blues, it's a little bit more contained because it's just you and the text, right? So there's only so much latitude you can have for dirty fighting or throwing sand in somebody's eyes or anything like that.
Okay. Is this a game? So obviously this Kickstarter is going to get funded. I have absolute faith in you. It gets funded. This book gets published. Is there any plans? We asked you the same thing about the Fight to Survive, where you're going to be doing supplements to this maybe later where they can keep adding to it, even if it doesn't get the Kickstarter?
Well, it depends on interest. The Solo Martial Blues is almost halfway there, and it's about 5 days ago we launched. So it's going until March 1st, 2024.
You're doing pretty well as far as crowdfunding.
I mean, yeah, it's the thing is it's on Crowdfunder, which is a bit of a handicap in some ways to it. And also it's the month of February where everyone's crowdfunding, right? So it's a high competition month. I'm confident that we're going to fund. If we don't fund, the book's still going to happen because it's already done. So it's going to happen one way or another. It's just, let's get it out to people. Let's get people excited. Let's make this an event. It gets to be fun. Like having it as an event is fun, period.
I like events.
Are there any other plans? Well, I always had there's 2 books I really want to make in this line. I've got a lot of other tabletop role-playing games to make, like a lot of other tabletop role-playing games to make. I've got 6 planned for this year. So I want to do other things, but in returning to this universe, there's 2 things I want to do. One is a book that is just Kung Fu, that is a full-on Shaw Brothers, Golden Harvest, Shaw Scope, Kung Fu Bonanza, where we can do a proper like 5 deadly venoms and like 36 chamber style structure. And that's one. The second one is the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Cyborg, about a post-apocalyptic kung fu, or I guess I think Jean-Claude Van Damme was Shotokan karate, but the point is like a post-civilization martial arts structure that would accommodate things like Cyborg and Fist of the North Star, which was basically just martial arts Mad Max, right? And other like post-civilization martial arts, I think would be super fun. So that's the other one that I would want to do out of the lot. And if this particular Solo Martial Blues is very, very successful, then I can always do another book with another 10 years and another book with another 10 years, another book with another 10 years. I plotted out the history of this city over 100 years. So it's within arm's reach, and it's just a case of, do people want it?
Okay.
I'm down.
It sounds interesting. So you said it doesn't require dice to play this one. It's are there charts and tables they have to print things out then? Like how do they determine like the win or loss of every event?
So like Fight to Survive, there's a little bit of a rock, paper, scissors structure with the moves. So you know that if you somebody's punching and if you kick, your kick is going to beat their punch because it gets there sooner because you have more space. You know that if somebody's going to block, it's going to block that punch. Well, it might block the kick. You're going to have to compare technique. You know that if somebody's doing footwork, it's going to move away from that kick because you had to plant the other foot. So you know the relationships between the moves. When you're called upon to fight, you pick 3 moves because at least this is how I am in a fight. I can't think farther than 3 moves ahead because it's not necessarily going to go the way I wanted to. Like, oh, they blocked that. I didn't expect them to block that. So you pick 3 moves. You can issue them in any order, but you pick 3 of them. And then you look up on a little chart to see what your opponent in the text has done. So you know you're leading with a punch, for instance. And then you look up a little chart in the back of the book and you're like, oh, he kicked. Oh no, his kick is going to beat my punch. Oh, well, good thing I prepared a footwork. So I'm just going to dodge out of the way, like from his kick. And then you look up his next move and you're like, oh, he comes in for a punch. Oh, that punch is going to catch up with my footwork. We're in this brick back alley. I don't have a lot of room to maneuver. So what's the other move I've got? Oh, I was playing it defensive. I packed another block. Okay, I'm going to block the punch that's coming in. That's great. What's his last move? Oh, another punch. Oh, it's not going to get through. Awesome. I didn't get hit. the round's over.
Nice.
So you're kind of dynamically comparing what's going on. It's very exciting in the book, so long as you have the chart handy. It's very exciting to be like, to not know what your opponent is going to do.
This almost sounds like it could work on a card game style too, like I don't know, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon type deal.
Well, it's funny you say that, JR, because I did do up a deck of combat cards that you can order through DriveThruRPG.
Oh, nice.
That is a deck of references for the punches and the kicks and the footworks, what have you, but also comes with, I think it was 12 like ready to go NPC fighters that you can pop out. So things like a sailor on the docks, or things like a big heavy bodyguard bouncer man, or a yakuza, or this or that. So it's a fun little pack of combat cards, and a handy rules reference as well for the fight, so you can keep track.
Would it work for both Fight to Survive and the solo game?
Absolutely it does. Yeah,
outstanding. I just kept thinking, like, when you're doing the rock paper scissors, you could almost see that like a card game going back and forth. Well, where I don't know, I could see that being a fun in a card format.
Well, you can. What I found is that if I'm going to conventions and I'm teaching the game to people for the first time, the cards help me conceptualize them and help people conceptualize the action. But it becomes so intuitive when you learn it that by the end of the session, maybe the end of the second or third session, people do away with the cards and they can just do it with their with memory or with what they've written down, and just like write down their 3 moves and just scratch them out as they go.
Okay, that actually does sound interesting. And you said that card deck, if people want to buy that as a supplement, they would buy it separate from the crowdfunder. They'd go to what?
They would go to DriveThruRPG or DriveThru Cards, and they are the Fight to Survive combat cards. That is
I will throw those in the show notes just so that way. Okay.
Sure, they're just a fun little add-on. I try to give as much value as possible, so it's not just a bunch of move reference cards. It's also a bunch of opponents, and it's also a tracking card, and it's also a little tiny map of the city that actually printed very well. I was surprised because the city is pretty complicated, but it came out well on a little playing card.
Were you able? That's another thing. You have part of this game is you're going through this town that you created. Is there a way where you can print out like a street map almost that you could spread out on the table while you're playing?
I made a file of a big map available to the Kickstarter backers. I should put that up on the website. Yeah, that is possible, Joe. I just haven't, I guess, made it publicly accessible yet. Oh, it's on the Discord. Yeah, it's on the Discord under the resources tab. I put it up there.
Nice. Because there's some third-party entities where you could go, like, I don't know, Office Max or something, whatever. I don't know if you have that in Canada, but something along those lines. A lot of them will let you print stuff if it's just for you, even if it isn't, like, even if you don't necessarily own the IP, because people print stuff for their games all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good copyright notice at the beginning of my book that says, please print the play materials that you like. Like, absolute permission is given, because what's you supposed to expect people to play unless they can?
Yeah, I had one where I printed something to edit it, and they gave me grief, so I had to get a letter from the publisher. It's like, no, he's printing this to edit it. But generally speaking, for game stuff, I think it's kind of understood they expect you to print stuff.
I can't imagine. I mean, there must be some out there, but I can't imagine anybody complaining. The text in the front of my book is cribbed from far better books than mine. And it says that please copy out materials that you need in order to play the game, or to broadcast the game over a live stream, or to play in a public space, or et cetera, just to make sure that, like, I'm sorry, it's your game once you've got it, and I want you to have it. So
I love that you are very consumer focused, player focused, because sometimes some of the bigger companies, it feels like they get so greedy, they want to charge you for everything, nickel and diming you to the end, to the point where it just stops being fun to engage. I think that's where a lot of the indie games come in, because they're just, that sense of fun is still there, which is why we're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, I'm a guy who runs a weekly game and a monthly game and another monthly game, because I love playing. I'm in the hobby. I live it. And my publishing ventures are rinky dink. I'm a small indie publishing house. this is only like maybe a part-time income for me, and I just want to be doing it. I just want to be here. And if people are going to play my game, I am in it just for the faint praise of somebody saying, "Oh yeah, I know your game." Like,
okay. So if a player approached you and be like, I wrote this supplement for your game and we used that, are they going to get in trouble if they start talking to you about it in your Discord? Some publishers get a little weird about that kind of fan
Are
stuff.
you kidding? I would be so flattered. If somebody said they wanted to publish something, then I might have to have a conversation, because I'd be like, oh
Right,
God,
right.
like, have I got to do an SRD or something? I don't know. But if people are writing and people are engaging, that's all that any of us could ever ask for as a publisher.
I'm just picturing someone who's like, I have this one very niche, narrow martial arts that I just have to have, so I had to write a supplement for it so I could put it into the game. I could see that kind of stuff happening.
I would be giddy. Like, already people share with me they're super cool characters. In fact, there were 2 pages in Fight to Survive that were just backer characters. I'll be honest, when I put that up as a Kickstarter kind of stretch goal, I was prepared to get some pretty lousy characters, or some pretty generic characters, but every single one of those characters was so preposterously interesting. They have since worked their way into my own games.
Nice. I'm just picturing now, they used to do on the History Channel this thing where you'd get these warriors that never met, and you'd figure out like what the stats were, and you'd run simulations to see who would win. So like Spartans versus, I don't know, ninjas.
Rangers. It was Spartans versus Rangers.
Yeah, but I could just see that working with the various martial arts forms that never met each other, and just seeing which one wins. Like a remake of that show with just various martial arts styles could be interesting.
I mean, martial arts styles, Fight to Survive and Solo Martial Blues does not approach it like this, but you could conceptualize martial arts styles as Pokemon, right? Because they say that the Mantis Fist style, specifically the Wang Lang Northern Mantis, was specifically designed to overcome the Shaolin style of combat. So is the Shaolin's temple style, the generic Shaolin's temple style, so like your basics, your Mizongs, is it better? Is it a bad style because Mantis style can overcome it? Well, no, it's designed to overcome it. So you can make those kind of structures and claims, because a lot of these martial arts were developed out of necessity. Like Tibetan White Crane has huge sweeping arm movements because they were wearing snowsuits. Is that the ideal martial art to be doing in a hot climate? Well, no, probably not. So there's a lot of variables behind what these structures of martial arts are, and it would be. I think you could do that in a way. But the problem is the fighter matters more than the martial art, and I don't know anybody who sticks 200% to their martial techniques when you're in the middle of an interaction. Like, things fall away, adrenaline spikes, and your technique gets sloppy, and you start mixing things up. And to a certain extent, that's good. Like, a lot of the punches in karate, especially, are structured around overemphasizing the arm motions so that you can tighten them up in a real fight. So that you could, you don't have to sink your hand all the way down to your hip. It's just, what's important is knowing that the corkscrew motion is where the power is, and that you want the power coming up from out of your other hip and then planted from your foot. So long as you've got that, you've got the karate punch. You don't need to make something that's going to be aesthetically beautiful if what you need to do is get the punch off, right? So I don't know that the martial arts are ever truly expressed in a fight. They're just tools to help you express yourself in a fight.
Okay. I clearly don't know as much about martial arts. All I know about Shaolin, for instance, is David Carradine in that one movie series from like the 70s.
Kung Fu.
Kung Fu is great.
Wasn't he supposed to be a Shaolin monk?
Yeah, he was a Shaolin monk. Kung Fu is great. Donnie Yen is apparently remaking that.
Oh,
that'll be good.
Yeah. But okay, now, so if you mentioned you don't care if people print things to play the game, obviously this is for the solo one, but it's because it's in the same world. If players wanted to like live stream their games for this, or for the other one. Is that allowed?
Are you kidding? I would be your first cheerleader.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, no, that's very much a yes. I would be super happy for people to live stream. I'm always interested in how people interpret the rules. Like, I don't know if you know John Wick. Is the developer who developed Seven Seas and a number of
Not
other.
the John Wick I was thinking about. Okay.
No.
The
There's two
not
John
the
Wicks
movie
that are
John
relevant to
Wick.
this. The tabletop role playing game John Wick, but he had Fight to Survive on his 30 days of character creation for in December. I'm like,
Nice.
oh, John Wick knows what's going
That's
on.
cool.
That's nice. And he flubbed one of the rules, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right, I see how it's going, John Wick. But I don't know. It's always interesting, the stress test of people interpreting things from their perspective. I was on another interview for this, and the guy knew a lot about Fight to Survive, and he said, hey, how come you're making the transition of solo martial blues doing every single year? And like going in sequence of the years, because Fight to Survive, you didn't always, you skipped years often. And I'm like, I didn't say that in the text. I said you could skip years, and I'm interested in the fact that you're skipping years. That's really interesting. That's neat. And some people have gotten back to me saying that they play that way, is they do a year here and a year there, and then they skip a bunch. And they do a year here and a year there. And other people are just doing like year after year after year after year after year to give a really thick sense of progression. And the game can be played in a lot of different ways. So I would be super pumped to see somebody's game play out, just to see where people take it in terms of an imaginative space.
So you mentioned you take it by the year. So do you factor in the wear and tear that kind of life takes on your body as you age and that sort of thing? Is that factored in to the gameplay?
Incredibly, yes. Like I don't know about you, but in my 40s, I definitely have a dislocation from a fight that happened when I was in my early 30s that never healed properly.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure that kind of structure was in the game. You can be nursing a wound for years. It's all about hard choices. So you're moving through the years, your body's going to be slowly deteriorating. You're just not going to be as good of a fighter as you used to be, even as your technical skills or your know-how is going up. And you're going to have to reach a point in Fight to Survive, role-playing martial arts meets heart, certainly, where you can't continue in the martial lifestyle, and you need to find a successor and pass on your martial lineage to someone else, so that somebody can take up the baton, and that can become your character. There isn't the same structure of succession in solo martial blues, just because it's one lonely fighter. So there's nobody to take over for you, because you're running your character through the gauntlet.
Right.
But the things that you do and the fights that you get into can hurt you badly in ways that you can't always mend from very easily.
Okay. Is there how do you calculate that in? So like one bad hit to your eye, you could be blind out of one eye. So do you factor those kinds of things in, and how do you determine that?
Okay. Well, if you want to get into the rules, you've got check boxes to represent your health. And so the first checkbox, the first bracket is bruised, and then it's beat up, and then it's knocked out, and then it's dying. You've got 3 checkboxes in each of those. When you get hit, it's usually just for one checkbox, but you could get hit by, say, a baseball bat, which is like 3 checkboxes.
Ugh, hate baseball bats.
Yeah. Each time that you fill in a checkbox for health, you get a choice. You can either keep filling in the bracket that you have, or you can move up to the first of the next bracket. The advantage of filling up to the first of the next bracket is you get to knocked out pretty quickly, and then you can actually be knocked out, and knocked out works the way actually being knocked out works, which is to preserve your body, right? To prevent you from getting into more fights. So you have a choice about whether or not you get knocked out. So you can choose to kind of fill up those brackets, and each of the first ones are easy to heal. So you can get rid of that. If you choose to really sink in your heals and really take the damage, each of the check boxes as they go up in each bracket are harder and harder to heal. So second checkmark boxes become a bigger deal. They're a lot harder to heal. Third checkmark boxes, it might be years before you can actually heal that kind of injury. So each time you get hit, you are choosing how much you're wanting to stay in that fight, or if you want to give up. right? And it's kind of like, is that real? Well, it's kind of like that unconscious choice that you make when you feel that impact on your face, and you're like, do I want to rise up, and do I want to damn the consequences and see this through, or do I really need to fight this, and can I just let it go? So the health structure kind of emulates that really
that
tough
resonates with
call.
me in a particular bar fight that I won't go into specifics, but I was losing. My head was swelling up like Stuart from Family Guy, and I had the good graces to be like, "Hey, man, how about we go back in and I buy you a beer instead of continuously beat my ass like you're doing?" Because I don't know how. I mean, I'll keep getting up because I'm stupid, but I don't want to keep getting up. I'd rather have a beer.
Yeah. I mean, if only everything could resolve as peacefully as that, right? And
Right.
I found that most of the fights that I've got into have ended with booze, have ended with peace, have ended with
Yeah.
reconciliation.
Breaking bread is,
Yeah.
as you will, even though
That's the old trope
always,
about
hey,
most young boys, their best friend started as a fight in the schoolyard.
oh,
and then when
absolutely.
the fight was over, like, it's your best friend kind of thing. Like, there's something
Like,
to be
hey,
said.
you want to get a Dr. Pepper after this? Because that'd be nice. And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds great.
So
And it
JR,
works with adults.
in answer to your question, there's a health system in place that's it's simpler when you see it happen than how I've explained, that it gives you a series of hard choices about how you want to distribute that damage. Do you want to stick in this fight longer and potentially have a lot of long-term injury, or do you want to let it go?
I will say that
is there a offer a beer option? Like, I'm tired of fighting. Can we go get a drink?
Well, it says in the text, because all fights break down into 2 out of 3 rounds, regardless of the round structure, could be a complete artifice.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be. It partly it's just a consideration of there are other people around the table, and you don't want to spend too long on a one-on-one fight with these guys. And partly it's just let's get to the point. We don't want to have unlimited numbers of rounds. Best 2 out of 3. So the text is very clear about, after each round, you stop, and you have to consider, is this something you want to continue to pursue?
You put a good breakdown of the rock, paper, scissors thing in the Kickstarter, crowdfunder, page. So I mean, it's pretty simple to conceptualize, even having never played it. So I think that helps. So the rest of it's just how you track the results of that, right?
Yeah, and it's call and response. I do one thing, you do one thing, you do one thing, et cetera, et cetera. The only time that kind of breaks is with defensive moves. So, for instance, if I decide to turtle and I open up with a block, and I'm just going to keep my high block, and you're going to just punch, I can block them all and then return with a vicious counter of some kind. So there's a lot of tactics involved in this, which makes it feel.
Oh, he froze. We'll prompt him when he comes back, because I think he's going to be okay. But the art is definitely pretty amazing for this. Did you check out the crowdfunder, Nick? Some of the other art that they had?
I did. Very impressed by the artwork.
Stephen Wu did great.
I did some add-ons too, because I really want to play this game.
Oh, he's back. Okay, so you were talking about the strategy when you're playing.
Yeah, the strategy when you're playing is you're picking 3 moves out of 5, and it's got some complicated implications because, for instance, defensive moves can stand over the course of many other moves. So if I'm coming in with a block and you decide to punch it, you can punch and punch and punch and punch, and I'm making you burn all your moves on my block until I come back with a counter. So there's a lot of strategy involved, but there's only 5 moves, and you're only picking 3 of them. So you very quickly can get to the heart of what you want to do, especially because if you're in a certain training, like let's say you're taking kickboxing, well, then your kick is much better. So you have certain biases. Let's say you're fighting a sumo wrestler, you know kind of what he's going to want to do because you know where he's training. So you're guessing. It's fun.
Okay. Well, Nick just pinged me and told me that we're approaching the 2-hour mark because I got lost in this one. And I promised him, like, we're going to keep this one tight.
Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed
got to
it.
get up early. And then we got nerdy about martial arts and beating each other up. And I absolutely know almost nothing about this topic, but it's fascinating just from the minimal exposure I had as a kid. When you come out with your next product, we definitely want you back because these are always fun chats. And we might have to come up with some panel topics around martial arts movies and such, just because this is,
I say bring them into the canon topic when we go into that.
Yeah, we have to reschedule that one because somebody got snowed in when they went skiing, so we had to reschedule it. But we're
Damn weather.
Damn weather, that's right.
Weather is the enemy of soul. Yeah.
We're going to link to the crowdfunder. We're going to link to all your social medias. So is there any one takeaway you want to give the listeners at home for this as we wrap it up?
The one takeaway that I have for Solo Martial Blues from Radio James Games is that if you want a martial arts role-playing game that feels down to earth and gritty and has a good sense of verisimilitude and tries to hook you dramatically with the sappy kind of story conventions that you would get in the late 80s martial arts cinema, I don't think you'll ever find another game like this. This is the one. So please go to crowdfunder. Please try and support it if you're able to, and it will be available around all the circuits once it's out, and you can pick it up then too.
And I know it's a tough month and you might not be able to back it now. You're going to hope it funds because you're going to buy it later when your finances.
It's going to fund.
One thing you can do, even if you can't afford to back it right now, is share it, tell a friend, get the word out, because that, obscurity is the death of art. And if people don't know it's there, they can't buy it.
Please absolutely share, because Kickstarter gets a lot of love on people sharing their Kickstarters. Like when they back something, crowdfunder having less traffic, you need to share all the more. So please take to the social media. If this is something that you want to see happen, then vote with your dollar or vote with your attention and share it out. Because the more people we can get on this, the better. When I funded Fight to Survive, when it was all packaged and done, I got countless emails from people saying, wow, this is the coolest thing ever, and I never heard about it. How could I get on it now? So the word out is the most important thing about things like this.
Absolutely.
Dear listener, I backed it on air as we were making this, doing this interview. So if you trust me, you trust the show, I don't deliver you crap products, go on there and back this.
Okay? Well, thank you very much, Nick.
All right. And so speaking of backing this, one thing that you can also do is if you do back it, reviews matter. So you can review it at DriveThruRPG, Drive-Thru Cards. If you buy the decks there, you can review or leave comments on the crowdfunder. So anywhere you want to spread the word, you can write about it on your blogs. If you make blogs, that's cool. But sharing the word does help. It does help the right consumer find the right products that will just make their year. So, do your part, spread the word, vote with your dollars. We greatly appreciate it. Where can they find you online, James?
You can find me online at radiojamesgames.com. It's the best place. But you can also look up Fight to Survive or eventually Solo Martial Blues on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or through the Indie Press Revolution or Compose Dream Games.
All right, and we skipped one of the religion questions because we got nerdy so quick that I didn't have time to ask. So you're going to answer it now, sir. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
I drink both coffee and tea at different times of day. I drink coffee in the morning with cream. I grew up on a dairy farm, so when I say cream, I mean proper cream, like as creamy as possible, but not very much of it. So like dense cream, but not much. So like a cream. I don't take sugar in my coffee. I'm sweet enough, and I drink my tea clear.
Outstanding. All right. And with that being said, if you want to find us, dear listener, linktr.e, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the Twitters. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, for professional purposes only. We also have our Blasters and Blades Facebook group where you can join the chatty chats with us and talk all the things. If you want to talk to James there, I will ping him so he has to come and answer you. We will kidnap him if we have to, cross the Canadian date line or whatever that is. I don't know. I'm not Canadian. And we link to Madam Stabby Stab's Instagram, Twitter, and email. So if you want to send all the hate mail, she's going to make you cry, but that's where it's at. We have our website, anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters tack and tack blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. These episodes are not free to produce, and we appreciate your patronage. Or you could support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put the comment section that is for the podcast, and I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes because it's exhausted from processing the caffeine. Is that possible, Stabby? Will you ever surrender?
No.
Speaking of coffee, tea, or hot chocolate, if you want to help the show another way, is Coffee Brand Coffee, an affiliate sponsor of the show. American Coffee, producing here in the U.S. and shipping to you in the U.S. And it's not a drop ship operation. They actually roast it themselves, and it's a good company. And we get a little bit of a kickback when you buy it. If you use the code Podcast Grunts, the link will be in the show notes. You get 10% off, and that's a pretty good sweet deal. I buy my coffee there now because I'm kind of hooked on their s'mores. The s'mores, man. I never thought I'd go for that level of frou-frou, but I'm here for it.
S'mores is the bomb, dude. S'more coffee. Yeah.
Now I want to start a bonfire and actually make real s'mores. Weekend project.
Come out to the new place when we're up and running.
We'll do that. All right. Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy caffeinated co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. Thank you for coming on, James. This was a lot of fun. I'm sorry you lost track of time. I promised you a tight hour, and here we are 2 hours later.
Well, I'm just happy to be here. Thanks, guys. It was a wonderful discussion, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Outstanding. This was a lot of fun. All right, people. Have a nice evening. And